excited to, because before the headwaters stream was not wasn't reachable by from the creek itself, from the tidal part of the creek. So next slide, please. These are just a few of the sewage spills that different folks in our community have alerted us to these, and we would pass it on to the city if they had not already passed it on to the city. And so there's been a couple of sewage spills in the creek, as you can see here, back in 2018, and then two in 2023. And the city did respond and handled all those sewage spills. And so we're happy to hear that. And the one at Heritage, actually, the city of Annapolis is working up there on a restoration project in the stream that comes into the like flooded, the open wetland area of the headwaters. And that should be coming in the next year or so. So that we should see some good numbers also from that, hopefully, because that's a very degraded area and has needed restoration for a long time. Next slide. And this was another thing from this is looking out at the tidal part of Spa Creek, and up to the right is the tidal and non-tidal interface. And that's a living shoreline that's trying to get established there from the restoration project. And there was an oil spill at Bates Middle School that some good neighbors alerted us to, and so the school district had to keep putting out these oh God, I just forgot the name of these bumper things to capture the oil. And so I think they finally fixed the oil spill that was coming from underground from an oil tank in the school that they didn't even know, I think, existed. So that was at least taken care of, but it did take out a part of our living shoreline there, which is not, I don't think it's grown back, because I'm sure it needs more. Oh, there's a chat. Could you back up a bit and describe what the restoration projects included? Sure. So the restoration in the headwaters, so the headwaters stream runs from Lincoln Drive down to, excuse me, to the Chesapeake Children's Museum pedestrian bridge, the bridge that goes between Bates and the Children's Museum. It's a mile-long stream, and the restoration included raising the level of the lower part of the stream from Spa Road down to the pedestrian bridge. We had to raise that about 1.5 feet because there was a big drop off from under Spa Road to there. So to the stream down below Spa Road. I'm sorry. So that whole area was raised about 1.5 feet, all up in the stream, all the way up to Lincoln Drive. The stream itself was widened and the level was raised in order to make it into a sort of a floodplain again, which is what it was, which is how it naturally was supposed to be. And so if you walk up there, if you walk across the like the South Cherry Grove pedestrian bridge, and you look up and down the creek, you can see what it looks like back in there. It's a flatter, wider floodplain area, so that the water can go in a more natural route rather than down like a chute of sort of going down a sliding board before that. And so that restoration happened about 15, no, maybe 12 years ago. And then 2 years after that, I think it was 2 years after that, we did the Hawkins Cove stream restoration. And that was, Hawkins Cove is a cove over in Eastport. It runs between the housing authority apartments and back to I apologize, I'm getting trying to get over a cold. Um, it runs between like Truxton Park, basically Truxton Park and Spa Cove Apartments and all that are on one side, and the other side is streets in Eastport and the Housing Authority. And the Hawkins Cove stream runs between those areas and it goes up to like places off of Hilltop and all flow into Hawkins Cove. Hilltop Road, all the apartments along, if you're don't going to Truxton Park, everything on the right there flows into Hawkins Cove. And that was also another degraded stream, which we restored after doing all these lots of upland work in the apartments and the condos and communities up above the stream too. But that was so that stream goes down into the into Hawkins Cove itself and ends right below the housing authority community building there. So I hope that answers your question. So and we have seen lots of critters up in the headwaters, which is really wonderful, and in Hawkins Cove stream too. And we get lots of sightings, and we always ask people if to send us your pictures and send us your any sightings of anything you find there, because we love to see it. And in the headwaters, there are beaver up there, and the contractors, when they did the restoration up there, they built, they were called beaver dam analogs, and they were to kind of uh, recreate a beaver dam so that the area would hold the water. You know, there's lots of step pools and rocks and everything up there too, but the beaver dam analogs did a fabulous job. And then the beavers came back too. I mean, I'm sure they were there anyway, but there's been lots of beaver activity. And people have seen otters and I'm not sure what else up there. Lots of other critters, herons and all kinds of birds and all, but we do love to see that. And so anytime anybody sees anything in the Spa Creek watershed, we ask you to let us know. If you see any kinds of problems with construction sites, I mean, you should let the city know too, of course, but sometimes letting somebody else know too is probably a good practice. And but if you see any kind of trash or debris like sitting around, if people are dumping, if you see anybody dumping anything, um, it's really good to let us know because we can try to let other people know and take care of that. And if anyone is interested in sponsoring a water testing site, we always welcome your donations. They cost about $1,000 a site for the summer. And we get really good information from those sites. Okay, Tammy, next. And one of the projects that we did this past year is a curriculum study with the sixth grade science class at Bates Middle School. Heather Carter was their teacher, and the kids, we bought infrared thermometers for the kids to go out and test the temperatures out in their parking lot at Bates and then back along the creek under the trees to see the difference in the temperature and the to learn about the urban heat index. And so then that we had so they did a curriculum study on that. And the kids wrote them up. They wrote up a bunch of kids entered their posters and their essays on what they had learned. And so we had a contest. We did a marketing campaign for them. We had a marketing person teach them how to convince people that the importance of planting trees to lower the urban heat index. And so that was a really fun that was a fun activity for us I didn't have to do any of the work with the kids, but then one day we did take all the kids from the sixth grade out on the creek. We had a day, Tammy was there doing water testing with the kids. We had Simon Brown doing fish seining. You can see right here. This was at Amos Garrett Park. And we had a drone. Jack Turner came with his drone to show the kids what the school looked like and what the creek looked like from the air. And then took them out on the water taxis. And many of these kids they'd never been on the creek. They'd never been under the Spa Creek Bridge. They hadn't, I remember one person, I think Donna said, one kid on her boat said they didn't know that ducks could fly. And so it was a very exciting day for us because one of the goals of the Conservancy is to educate kids to appreciate the creek and appreciate what it means to take care of the creek. But in order to do that, they have to be able to be on the creek and be in the creek. And so, our goal is to make it swimmable and fishable, is so that, it's safe for people to be in it, and that people feel, the kids and everybody in Annapolis actually feels welcome in and on the creek. So it was it was a great day. And these kids here holding, we had kids holding eels and snakes. And when they first got there, they were terrified of all the fish and everything. And by the end of the time, this was their favorite part, I think, was the fish seining. So it was really a good day. And then, so we have our weekly water testing coming up May 15th through September 11th. We have our Green Give on June 3rd and 4th, and that is an online fundraiser that Spa Creek Conservancy partners with. I think this year it's 8 or 9 other environmental nonprofits in the county. And we all like collaborate with each other and partner to boost each other and give each other a, support. And so it's sort of a collaborative fundraiser. And we are happy to have any donations that anybody would like to give. You can go on our website, and they're on June 3rd and 4th. And we would welcome your donations and would thank you for that. And I'm assuming people know, but we are an all volunteer organization. So we don't have any overhead or staffing issues. So all of the money that we make goes into projects and goes into the ground, into the water, into education, things like that. So we also have Kids on the Creek, August 24th. Right now, it's at Truxton Park. Hopefully the situation will remain that we're allowed to go in the water at Truxton Park that day. So be looking for information for that. But that's another day that we get kids who don't have access to the water a day to go out on the creek and in the creek and paddleboard and kayak and go on power boats and fish seining and do lots of on-land things too. And finally, our Upland Truxton Cove project is a project that's been in the works now for like 2 years. There are 3 communities along Hilltop Road, Saltair, the Landings, and North Green. And we've been working with those communities and have finished the assessment, and we're in the design and permitting phase for 5 projects in those communities. All of those communities border a stream that runs into Truxton Cove, which is behind Truxton Park, and the Salvation Army it goes under Hilltop Road and ends up by Truxton Park. And one of our water testing sites is there. And so it will be a really wonderful project. It'll be a great way to see the difference that a restoration project can make, because we have so many years of before testing. This is only part of This is only part of the stream. We have 5 sites that will be designed and permitted by this summer. And then we are getting funding for the design and permitting of the stream that goes through those neighborhoods too. And the stream goes as far up as to the city property by Hilltop. And then once those projects are built is when we will see the difference in the water, hopefully see the difference in the water quality. But we have a few years for that. This is slow work, but we're hoping maybe by next year that a couple things might be built, and so we can start to see some improvement in water quality there. And I think that's the end of mine. These are some pictures. And then I'm going to introduce, as you all probably know, Tammy Domansky, but I wanted to say something first for Tammy, and I wanted to present. This is for Tammy, for Dr. Tammy Domansky, with gratitude for 10 years of valuable and comprehensive collection of data on the health of Spa Creek. Spa Creek and its residents, human and aquatic, who love to boat, paddleboard, fish, crab, and watch the birds. Thank you for their weekly health report. And we would like to present Tammy with you won't be able to see it, Tammy, a crab platter created by a local potter, Mel Wilkins. Can you see it, Tammy?
Thank you so much. That's beautiful.
Mel Wilkins, who was one of our founders, had these made many years ago for us, and we've been saving this one. This is the last one, and so we thought Tammy would be the right recipient for that. So we thank you very much, Tammy, for all the years.
Oh my gosh, thank you. That's so nice. That's very nice. Thank you so much.
Okay, I'm handing it over to you.
Okay.
Oh, so what do I do now? Do I have to do something?
I don't think you have to do
Okay.
anything. There are 3 things in the chat. I'm not sure if anyone does anyone have any questions for Amy before we move on? Could you back up, I think. Oh, I think that's it. I think that's good. So last chance for questions, and then we'll move on if that's okay.
I have a question. This is Russ Powell. This will seem pretty elementary to those of you who are more experienced than I am, but I was wondering about what seemed like low-hanging fruit to me, in the sense that they're obvious sources of pollution that one would like to remedy. But I suppose on the other side of the equation is the fact that maybe there's not authority or money to do anything. I mean, I'm looking across the creek right now at several streets that, are of course impervious, and then they run right to a bulkhead.
Right.
And it seems to me every time it rains, there's this funnel of pollution that runs down out. And I guess you could look at it and say, well, geez, that's fixable. And the answer is, yeah, it's fixable, but it costs money. Is that sort of the answer?
And they're not all fixable because
Okay.
there's not the room, and we've done a few street end parks. And there has to be space for them.
Right.
And there has to be it's a lot of money too, but
Yeah.
lots of them have people are turning around there to go back
Right.
up the street since they end in the creek. And so it's terrible to watch. I live on one of those streets, and I watch the water go down and go right through the hole in the bulkhead. And yeah, it kills me every day, every time I see a rainstorm. But
Well, thank you. And I know I'm treading on ground that you've already been over, but I guess the one other thing is that I was wondering about storm drains. I live in a condo and we have storm drains, and silly me, I didn't realize that the storm drains run straight into Spot
yeah,
Creek. People wash their cars. I
yeah.
thought, well, is there something we could do to at least persuade people to maybe use different, more different cleaning products? First of all, don't go to a car wash or use different cleaning products. I don't know.
On our website, we do have the how to wash your car for a clean creek and how to wash your boat for a clean creek. So we
Right.
do have handouts. So maybe you could go to our website and you could
Yeah.
share it with your neighbors, or share it like with your condo board or something, and they can send it around to people.
I thought about writing to you and asking you if you would jawbone my condo board, because I did, people would tell me, look, don't tell us what to do, whereas you have the credentials. But that's not in your job description. You do enough, right?
Oh, well, no, we're happy. Always happy to do that. But, I think, well, I'm happy to do
Okay.
that. So you can, yeah, if you give me your email address
Email.
or something,
Okay.
or send me an email at
Sure.
president@spacreek.net,
Yep.
Donna, net org. Oh, forget. Um,
It's .net.
Mhm.
okay, sorry,
I'm
forgot.
sorry. President at Spa.
President@spacreek.net.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for indulging me.
Of course. Thank you for being on the call.
So that makes a good transition to some data. So let me get this so I have a presentation. Let's see. This is lagging a bit, so there we go. Okay, so first of all, I want to say thank you so much. That was for the platter. That's just lovely. My the first thing I have on my notes is to, although we usually wait and do thank yous at the end, I wanted to make sure I said up front also how fortunate I feel and how thankful I am to Spa Creek Conservancy and all of the individuals and communities and that support the work. I feel very fortunate because of the fact that Spa Creek Conservancy and communities and individuals on Spa Creek understand the importance of understanding and being aware of and keeping track of water quality, that it can inform future decisions in the future, and it can help us see how successful things are and give us some of that information about what's going right and what's going wrong. So to your point about things that people can do that seem like low-hanging fruit, you made excellent points. Ends of streets, these outfalls that are a little less obvious, even it's hard to say this, green lawns, right? We call a nice green lawn green concrete. So we talk often about the truly impervious surfaces because they are obvious and don't look as pretty, but a very nice green lawn can be problematic also. So there's a number, as Amy said, there are a number of resources at spotcreek.net and other ways to find out about some ways to be more green, and we're always helpful to give that information. So where we are. So for the report today, I always go through some information for this year, and I'll also then go and do some historical data. The first year we actually did testing, there were talks in 2015. The first day that we did testing, it was only on Spa Creek, and we had 5 sites and a big dream, and they were all shore-based. It involved about 6 or 7 volunteers that were all sharing YSIs and instrumentation and going out to sites and doing a really, really good job keeping track of all of this information coming in. And now we're in 2025 and we're looking at data on 2 creeks, 15 sites that we do a range of testing on, YSI data, nutrient data, bacterial data, and then 17 sites when we look at the 2 extra sites that we've mostly just been doing bacterial testing. We have thousands of data points. I'm going to bring up some data today. There's so much more data that I can't get to, 9 years of data and more coming. So one comment that I always get is that I show too much data. But part of that, for my feeling, is that that's sort of my job, is to do the data. So on each slide, there are going to be graphs. Bear with them. You can ignore the graphs if you'd like, and I try to have a takeaway on the bottom of each slide for some of the main points. To understand where the sites are, please feel free to interrupt if you get lost in the site names. We have our own shorthand that we use for sites, and I'll try to make sure I'm going through that and highlighting the specific places we are when I start to go into the shorthand. But on Spa Creek, we sort of think of them as broken down into, there's the non-tidal, the CG, which is Cherry Grove, SCM, which is Children's Museum, which is right on that barrier, tidal, non-tidal. Then when we think of the headwaters area, we have what we call headwaters, then midstream merge, that's the MSM, and then right in Hawkins Cove. Last season, we're also now have added mostly bacterial testing, maybe some suspended solids at the Truxton Bridge. Then when we move out, we think about the midstream and out to the mouth of it with Cheston, Acton Cove. Oh, I'm sorry. We still call that Old Sept from when Capital Sept was there. Shipwright, we consider the mouth over here, and then out at the right at the mouth, we have the Eastport Yacht Club. Then we go to Back Creek. On Back Creek, we have them numbered in a very odd way. That's just how we started numbering. But BCC 1 is headwaters. Then we have the midstream. BCC 3 is right next to where Jabin's Marina is. BCC 5 is almost across from that, right near the, I've lost the name of the condos in my mind. There's condos. BCC 6 is a little further down, and then BCC 4 has also been added as a maritime museum that we're now in year 2 of that. So if we look at these areas, things that are closer to the headwaters and then moving out, every year we go through a discussion of is it worth taking some sites out? Should we add new ones in for some continuity of data? And we've kept them, all of them, and there's always a piece of information we can get specifically at an individual site. For example, to your question about these ends of streets, Shipwright, the MSW, we added specifically because it is a hard end. You just see the water flow in, and to compare that to Cheston, where there is a garden at the end. And surprisingly, there is not a huge amount of difference in the water quality at those two sites. I think part of it is because a lot of areas are confounded by outfalls that might be involved also. Okay, so how do we look at this? Every year I say this, I don't give one grade for the creek. There's good reasoning for that. Different rivers, even the bay, include somewhat different parameters in the final grade they give. In fact, even the bay report, the bay grade is changing has changed over the last couple of years and may be changing the parameters that are included. Enteric oxide, the bacteria that indicates a risk when swimming, that's not included in any grade for rivers or for the bay at this point. And there's discussion about bringing that up because including that because it's so pertinent to people that when you think about waters being swimmable. So in every case, I'm going to talk about either the actual values or use a grading scale that comes from the Mid-Atlantic Tributary Assessment Coalition, MTAC. And we have it's a relatively forgiving scale. If anyone wants to know the details of how the math is done, I'm happy to go through that. It is some averaging and then using a scale to look at how each value fits a scale of healthy to less healthy. And again, I can go through the math with anyone kind of separately. A lot of people don't want to hear those details. Oops, back here. In addition, for some parameters, I use kind of cutoffs or thresholds that the EPA has reported for healthy or unhealthy for conditions. Over the last several years, the Chesapeake Monitoring Cooperative has done a huge amount of work bringing some continuity and consistency to the way we do some of the testing, even the methods we use for testing and some of the grading scales, put some consistency in projects that are going on in Maryland. And so we appreciate their input. They've been out with us doing our testing so that we are, for a number of our parameters, are now what they consider tier 3, which is their highest level. And so we appreciate their input, and it helps us to generate data that can be shared and included in statewide reports, even included in MDE and DNR reports. Rain. I start with this, and here we go with the data I know, but it is so important. So if we look at 2024, right, the overall rain was low. If we look at it, it's comparable to 2020. But, it's the luck of the draw. 9 times out of 19, even though we were in 11 inches of rain, the rain fell within 48 hours of a sampling event. So there's some complexity to some of the data because some parameters are associated more by sort of the long-term amount of rain and how that affects the overall water quality and parameter like salinity. And so other cases, it's having rain occur right before sampling or within about 48 hours. So there's some complexity to the data that I'll try to always bring up with rain. In fact, even with that little bit of rain, we had all of the sites listed up here that were affected by more than an inch of rain. We can see sometimes, depending on the timing of the rain, effects on parameters, even when we only have like 0.2 inches of rain, if it falls very fast, or if it's kind of at this sweet point right before collection. Okay, I think that's all. So bacteria, this is one of the things that we focus on a lot because it's people want to know, how much bacteria is in the water that potentially can be from human, animal, bird sources. This is a parameter that is very affected by rain that occurs right before sampling or within 48 hours of sampling. So because we had a lot of rain that occurred before sampling, when we look at 2023 to 2024, we see an increase. So a geometric mean is calculated somewhat different than a regular mean, and what it does help to do is remove some of these outliers. For example, sometimes after heavy rain or last year when there was a sewage overflow, we can have values in over 20,000. That can destroy an entire average for a site for a season. A geometric mean helps to sort of tamp that down a bit. Also, we calculate separately for SPA title, which is everything other than Children's Museum and Cherry Grove, those upstream sites. Those seem to have significant challenges that are not the same that we see in tidal waters. And even when I say challenges, what we are finding and what I found at other sites that we look at that are non-tidal, that really are not swimming sites, that even though we use thresholds for convenience, the same thresholds that we use for swimming water, we tend to see much higher values, right? We have these stream areas, especially in areas where you have a lot of building, a lot of development. Animals tend to go to those streams. It doesn't take a lot of runoff from areas where people are walking dogs to affect the values there. So that's why those are broken off. Back Creek, we don't look at any sites that are non-tidal. We don't test any. So that's why Back Creek is separate. So if we look, the good news is when we look at this geometric mean over the season, the SPA title, everything other than Cherry Grove and Children's Museum, falls just below the threshold that the EPA has provided to consider it relatively healthy. And Back Creek, even including the most headwaters, the most upstream BCC1 up near the SPCA, even that the overall trend is relatively good. Again, they increased from 2023 because of the number of days that were sampling dates that were affected by rain. So just some specific sites that had, those sites that had in and of themselves, not as part of the whole group, that had means over the threshold. So the most headwater site in Back Creek was at 99, which is high, but for us that feels like good news. It's a relatively tight, somewhat tight area, and it is near where the SPCA is. So it's good to know that, that there's not this incredible contamination that's coming in from what's happening at the SPCA. Cherry Grove and Children's Museum, CG and SCM, those are very high. Keep in mind, many dates were affected by rain, but even without rain, we know that there's a lot of animal activity there that we feel drives that. Hawkins Cove and Headwaters, again, near the headwaters, and Hawkins Cove is relatively a tight area. So we really, there are other drivers that drive those, but neither one is outrageous. At Truxton Bridge, there's an asterisk there because we only started in August. Again, it's a marshy area. We really think a lot of that is driven by animal activity. One point I'd like to make is that, we worry about sewer overflows, and our data, as Amy mentioned, sometimes like notices and finds some of these problems. Keep in mind the overall effect of a sewer overflow is much less than just the effect of overall runoff that we get from impervious surfaces. So for example, if you look at the note, the sewer overflow in 2023 that had values at Children's Museum close to 20,000 bacteria per 100 mils. Even with that, this year, or say the year before in 2023, sorry, I keep getting my years off, in 2023, that was that overflow. In 2024, the overall geometric mean was still significantly higher than that, and there was not a sewer overflow. Salinity, this is surface salinity, energy surface and bottom, but it makes the point. So in 2023, we had very high salinity. And then in 2024, things were returned to typical values. This was a little surprising. Again, the rainfall, more water, fresh water coming in, tends to then help. Oh, okay. Yep.
Tammy, somebody asked a question in the chat, and I thought before you started on this, you might want to answer it. It's about animal activity at Children's Museum.
Is there a specific question or just because I can't see the chat?
Showed up, but do you not? Can you open the chat? Oh, it says, when you say animal activity around Children's Museum, are you referring to wild animals using the creek corridor or dog walkers using baits affecting the water there?
That's a really good question. We are not sure. And one of the last slides I'm going to show, sorry, that's my dog. One of the last slides I'm going to show shows some information about trying to do some molecular source tracking to try to figure out what the source of some of these high values might be. When we get to these marsh areas, like even at Children's Museum, with all the work that's been done, there are animals that we want to see. There's more, there are more waterfowl, there are more birds, and a number of birds, geese, ducks do have bacteria in their GI tract that will that are picked up and counted in our counts. We would like to have a clearer understanding of the input from different types of animals, and we're not sure yet. Yeah, but I do on that, like even like Cherry Grove, Children's Museum, Truxton, in these areas where there's a marsh area, we think that there's a very significant part of that due to wildlife. And that's in some cases okay. When we get to problems is areas that people want to have more contact with the water, and then you have to worry about that, right? There are places where there are large geese populations where then they've worked to get rid of geese. But those areas where it gets very up into there and it's very marshy, those are areas where you would not find people that would be swimming or anything like that. I hope that kind of answers your question, but I will make a little comment about trying to do the source tracking toward the end. So for salinity, last year with the low amount of rain, we would have thought that maybe salinity would be very high again, but it seemed to return pretty much to relatively typical values. Now, we've had a very dry spring again, and so the one time that we're out testing in April, already the salinity in 2025 was higher than the salinity in June in 2023. So salinity is very high again this season to start out. So unless we get a significant amount of rain, it might make for another one of these very dramatically high levels of salinity. Another thing that is a key indicator, well, I should say a hint for salinity and temperature, or when we start to see the sea nettles, they like higher temperature and salinity. So we see those earlier and earlier when we see some of these effects. Temperature. So temperature, we had a very surprising baywide we saw this trend where the temperature decreased in 2023. At first, when I saw our data, I was like, that must be a problem. There is no good reason that we see for that, but that was a Bay-wide trend that was noticed in 2023. In 2024, it increased somewhat. It's still not near the levels that it was several years ago. I'm going to mention here, and I might mention in another place or two, some things that we know can also affect some of these parameters have to do with the input of water that can come from the bay all the way up from the Susquehanna. We saw very overt examples of that in the 2018 to 19, where we had those record amounts of rain, and then they were literally just opening the floodgates, and we saw trees and things come down, and big effects on some water quality parameters. So while we sometimes think about this whole idea of like, it's always what's coming from the streams, the headwaters that's pouring into the bay, we know for sure that for some things we can have input from the bay coming in. So that could potentially also be affecting things like temperature if we're getting more input coming from up north from the Susquehanna. And some data from the Magothy River report this year suggests something along those lines also. Sally Horner did some work finding out the flow coming over the dam over the last couple of years. So clarity is a complex parameter. When we look at it's how much light penetrates through, and it can be affected by a number of things: suspended solids, colored organic material. So there are a number of things that play a role in clarity. One of them, these total suspended solids, I have the overall Spa Creek and Back Creek averages over the last 9-ish years. And we see this red line, and that's 15 milligrams per liter. Values under 15 milligrams per liter are considered more positive, less detrimental to aquatic life, aquatic plants, and aquatic organisms. So while every year since we've been doing testing, neither one of the creeks manages to have an average below that, we saw that in 2024 on Spa Creek, it was very close to that. So that's good. That's good news. So even though some parameters don't always do as well as we'd like, we saw an encouraging improvement in 2024 in that those total suspended solids. Now, along with that, we also saw some improvement in clarity in the score for clarity. Sorry, I'm trying to click and point to things and I keep advancing. So when we look at these scores for clarity, this is using then that MTAC scale. So for the MTAC scale, you look at the Secchi depth. So if you're not familiar for Secchi depth, you take the disc out that has the quadrants on it, white and black, and you drop it until you can no longer see the difference between white and black. It sometimes can be a little subjective, but it's something that anyone can do, and it's a nice, very clear demonstration of clarity and understanding it. So in both Spa Creek and Back Creek in 2024, we saw slight increases in clarity. The overall grade, if we put the value along the MTAC scale, is a D, but that improvement is encouraging. And also keep in mind, we focus on something I should have said at the beginning. For the sampling that we do sampling both at a number of shore sites. About half of the sites are right next to the shore, even though the vast majority of them are taken from the boat that Jason and Patrick are out on. I'll mention that at the end. They're very close to shore, and then about half are midstream. And in this way, we're not ignoring either location, right? Midstream, we often see that water quality is going to be better for a number of parameters. You have dilution from runoff before it makes it to the middle of the creek, or that flow. So even with taking into account some of these near shore sites and some of the complications they can have, we still are able to see that improvement. Another point, as I mentioned at the beginning, when we look at the rain pattern, the number of days that were affected by rain, looking similar to 2020, about almost half of the dates affected by rain. Even considering that the overall clarity grade on Spa Creek is still higher than it was in 2020. So we really have this feeling that there's this kind of like holding steady and even improving a little from the work that's being done. It's a slow progress, but we're on the time scale of the Earth, not our own time scale. Chlorophyll. So chlorophyll is a pigment that's important for plants for photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is very important. We also know that algae has chlorophyll and undergoes photosynthesis, also very important. The unfortunate thing is that when we see increased nutrients, this eutrophication in water, when we have too much nitrogen, too much phosphorus, then instead of seeing healthy plant growth, healthy amounts of algae, we instead get this coating of algae, these algal blooms, which then ends up, by the time it's done, actually sucking oxygen out of the water and contributing to dead zones. So chlorophyll can be an indicator, an early indicator of conditions that are ripe for algal blooms. So at all of the tidal sites, we do chlorophyll levels. And if we look at the MTAC grade, from 23 to 24, from 22 to 23, there was a decrease, but we do see that there was, a minor increase from 23 to 24. Part of that probably comes from the fact that in 2023, there was an early season, very persistent algal bloom. We did not see any persistent blooms in 2024. Having said that, when we were out, not on the spa, but we were out on Road River 1 week ago, no, actually 2 weeks ago, and there was already some indications that there was an algal bloom. Now, for that, knowing that the conditions are ripe for an algal bloom, knowing to give people warning, some algal blooms can be harmful, is important. The way that our chlorophyll is tested is we collect samples, and these are tests that we don't do in-house. We do initial processing, and then we send the samples to the Chesapeake Biolabs in Solomons, and they do a wonderful job giving us data. They get samples from all over the state, so sometimes we don't know what the chlorophyll levels were in June until September. And we then don't always think by just taking a glance at a sample that, oh, there might be the beginnings of an algal bloom, and save a sample that we can take to, for example, DNR, and have them take a look at it with a microscope and see if they can identify the beginnings, or even in some case, a full-blown algal bloom. What we have been also working on, helping out the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center. They have a grant in conjunction with NASA for what's called the Chesapeake Water Watch program. And that uses a phone app to look at turbidity, and then some, I won't say real time, it's not in the field, but same day results for some parameters, including what's considered an in vivo chlorophyll test. You basically take a sample, put it in an aquafloor instrument that's been calibrated specifically for chlorophyll, and get a reading that day. So this is, I know it's data, but there you can see the nice correlation here. So on one axis, we have the values that come from the same day analysis of samples. And on the other axis, we have the data that we get weeks to months later from the extracted sample. And there's very good correlation. They're not identical, it's not 1 for 1, but usually the in vivo values come up about 2-ish higher than the extracted. But that's okay. If we know the conversion of a sort, we can do things like use the information from the in vivo chlorophyll. For example, when we had a sample last week that didn't look great, from the in vivo, we could have taken that sample into DNR and had it tested. We didn't, we forgot, but we could do that and then know right away, and then be able to spread word and also talk to other organizations that are doing sampling, like, hey, how far do you think how far is this algal bloom spreading? other positives, it costs nothing. In part of the CERC Chesapeake Water Watch program, it's a participatory science program. And so the Aquaflora instrument that they initially lent out for labs to use will have access to in perpetuity. And so it's taking a sample and just taking a reading. In addition, we're environmental scientists, but yet some of the tests we do generate chemical waste. When we send out to have the extracted chlorophyll measured, not only is it more time taking the samples down, but there's also some waste that's generated that is not generated in this in the Aquaflora method. So we're hoping after doing this season, we're going to do all of the sites also with the instruments, and then do a comparison. And if things hold up, we may not in the future have to do the extracted chlorophyll measurements and have all of our chlorophyll data much sooner.
Tammy, one quick thing. I wanted to let you know that most of the coves in Spa Creek have been showing lots of algae too.
Oh.
So I haven't been there. I haven't seen them in a couple of days, but they have been the last couple of weeks, and lots of people have contacted me about it. And I did report it, I think, to DNR. I don't know who I reported it to, but anyway,
Right, 'cause last Friday I was there and it looked kind of murky. So what we'll be able to do is Thursday, the next time out, take a sample and we'll be able to see how the chlorophyll looks. And then we probably be a good idea this week to grab a sample and take it to DNR in Annapolis, and they give us an idea of what it is that's in the water. And then and talk right away to other organizations and see how far the spread is. Yeah, we used to think at this time of season we never would have those type of algal blooms, but yeah, they're happening earlier all the time. So dissolved oxygen. So dissolved oxygen is always a good parameter usually on Spa and Back Creek. It's part of it comes from the fact that it's relatively shallow, and 5 milligrams per liter is the key. Below, if dissolved oxygen levels are lower than 5 milligrams per liter, it stresses aquatic organisms. If you get below 2, it becomes very hypoxic and difficult for a number of organisms to stay there. And you will start to have death of organisms that can't move or move to an area with higher oxygen. So one piece of good news is in 2024, we saw the overall average, and this is the bottom, right? Obviously the bottom. The overall average on both creeks together, when averaged together, was over 5 milligrams per liter. So that is good news. That suggests that we have few instances where algal blooms get so bad, and things like temperature and other things that affect oxygen aren't bad enough that we get these very hypoxic or anoxic zones. Okay. Nitrogen. So when I talked about eutrophication, like this increased nutrients, we look at, we have total nitrogen and total phosphorus measured. Again, we do pre-processing, and Chesapeake Biolabs and Solomon's does the actual measurement. And for these parameters, we really look at trends, right? What is actually happening on the creek. When we look at things like TMDL calculations, they make estimates for nitrogen and phosphorus, how much is in the water, how much is being contributed to the water, how much a project will prevent from making it into the water. But it's nice to have some actual data. Nitrogen has been very confounding, not just on Spa Creek, but we also do testing on the Road River. And we've been trying to, as Amy mentioned, we used to start in May, and last season we had one sampling date in April. This season we had one sampling date in April. What we tend to find is for most parameters, right, things look better early spring, right? The water's clearer, there's less suspended material, fewer algal blooms, dissolved oxygen is better, you name it. Nitrogen has been, in many cases, the opposite. We tend to see with nitrogen that there's this peak early in the season. On the Road River, we see a very significant peak. And the truly interesting thing is that If we look at testing sites, the DNR, MDE, I forget if it's MD or DNR, I think it's DNR, buoys, and sites, and when they go out and do trips, they do monthly trips out to a number of sites. And there's a series of them from the Upper Bay all the way down. And if you look at the size of the spike early season, it's higher. And when you look at sort of the mouth of the Magathie, it's a little bit lower when you look at the mouth of the Severn. It's a little bit lower when you look at the mouth of the south of the road, et cetera. And when we look up the Road River, it's highest at the mouth and it gets lower up towards the headwaters. After always having this assumption that all of these nutrients are coming from runoff, from impervious surfaces, from farms in areas where there's not development, right? This was like somewhat shocking to see. And so there is something that's coming into the river from the bay that seems to be that's peaking very early, very, very early season. Now, Spa Creek being, in the Severn and then in the creek is more complex, of course, right? When we look at the pattern of sites, it's not as though if we look at Eastport Yacht Club, which is at the mouth, and we go then into Headwaters site HW and Hawkins Cove, that when we see this spike that we see early in the season, that it's higher at the mouth and lower in the headwaters. Because with creeks, things are tighter, because there's so much development around Spa Creek, we just tend to see that it's kind of high everywhere. But there is a subtle pattern, and we're going to be watching this annually now, of course, where when you get toward the mouth, it was somewhat higher and higher at the headwaters, and then in the middle, maybe a little lower. So there might be some contribution from both sides. So this is not just rain driven, as we see, right? This all the clouds show dates that were affected by rain. If we look at 2023 compared to 2024, the two biggest peaks we see, one is associated with rain and one was associated with that sewage spill. This is something else. But again, as I mentioned, it matches things that we're seeing other rivers in the bay that we're watching. For total nitrogen and total phosphorus, this is looking at, again, putting it on the MTAC scale. Good news is that for total phosphorus, even though, again, the score is in the D range, D to D plus, a little bit of C, but for phosphorus, even though it's in the D range, we see that's kind of holding steady, right? Back in 2020, things looked very bad, and there's been some improvement and then holding steady. For total nitrogen, both on Spa and Back Creek, there was somewhat of a decrease from last year when we made it all the way to or from 2023 when we made it all the way to a C. 2024 is a C minus, but that's still encouraging. It is encouraging. And again, something that could have adversely affected that was in 2023, we did not do an early April sample. In 2024, we did. So having an earlier time point when you might think it might make the values look better because it's early season, things look good. Well, for nitrogen, it may have had the opposite effect. Now, I like these dot graphs. These are to make a point. It's very hard to show when we have so many data points and so many sites to look at things as the big picture. So Hawkins Cove is one of the sites where there's been some restoration work done, and we measured lots of parameters, and we've been measuring that since day one. And so we really have to look at it on a large time scale. So you see all these colored dots, which are all of the data points, and then these trend lines. And when we look for most parameters, we see what we would hope to see happening for chlorophyll, right? This indicator of too much of potential for algal blooms, too much activity. If we look at that, that's the very top line. That is trending downward. That's what we'd want to see. We want to see chlorophyll levels go down. Clarity is the one outlier here. We'd like to see clarity go up, but instead clarity over the long-term scale seems to be going down somewhat. Again, this is something that is problematic, bay-wide. Total suspended solids, that's really good news, right? Hawkins Cove, the restoration work is helping to prevent materials, matter, from making its way into the creek. Dissolved oxygen, is going up, total nitrogen, the overall trend is down, as is total phosphorus. It's slight, it's small, but it's trending in the right direction. So with increased development, the creek is holding steady and in fact improving a little bit, because of, I'm sure, some of the work that's being done. Headwaters, moving up, the headwaters even a little bit more, toward where Children's Museum is. This is really getting close to where that's the non-tidal. Again, we see good news for really, in this case, all of the parameters. Things are trending in the direction we'd like. I don't have clarity on here, so I forgot that also is not moving in the direction we'd like. But it even shows that all the way up to the headwaters, we're seeing these improvements. Eventually, like, I've done graphs for most of the sites for this. Part of this season is to like generate this for all of them and to put some numbers on them, right? There are trends, there are correlations, but I want to do some more data analysis on these. When we look at Back Creek, right? Back Creek, we have a smaller data set. So this is 21, we have just a handful of years for this. Bacterial is trending, you know, how we'd like that, to see that go down. For a while, we were very concerned about what might be happening with runoff from even for the SPCA, where the dog park is, et cetera, but things are moving in a good direction. Clarity, again, is a problem everywhere. And total suspended solids, unfortunately, not doing as well as we'd like, and dissolved oxygen. So in Back Creek, there's still challenges. Bacteria is moving in the direction we want. Some of the other parameters, we still need a lot of work. Back Creek, you know, very developed, all the marinas on Back Creek. So it's very challenged. So 1 year at a time. Directly to someone's question about that, the source of the bacteria. There is a huge desire to understand clearly what the source is, the species, where this contamination is coming from. After the sewage spill last year, the Public Works from Annapolis, we had a discussion. They very generously provided some funding to fund some samples that went to this company, Jonah Ventures, that reports to have probes that can track DNA that would indicate activity from a number of species. So some of their probes, dog, deer, Enterococcus, some types of birds. But the biggie for us was they said they had a probe that would also indicate whether it was human contamination. So we sent in samples from sites that we knew the bacterial levels were low, sites that we knew the bacterial levels were high. And then I sent in 2 samples that should have been positive control. They were definitely contaminated with human feces and one with dog feces. And the problem is that the results were inconclusive. One of the problems is the probes that they have, one of them is specific for human DNA. And human DNA does not mean human fecal contamination, right? People come in contact with the water all the time. So when we called them on that and said that does not say that bacteria is from humans, they said, oh, well, now we have a probe that's specific for bacteria that would be found in the human gut. And that just didn't pan out. The sample I sent them that was positive control for human contamination did not show that. It didn't have that result. So I spent some time speaking with a few people, Dr. Katrina Lohan from CERC, who does a lot of DNA barcoding work. And there just is not a great foolproof way to do this right now. The targets that they're using were developed maybe a few years ago. Samples, bacterial samples, things evolve. They weren't developed for necessarily the strains and things in our area. So we gave it a shot. They're also still offering, so we can do additional sampling this year on them to see if they can convince us that works, but that's going to require we would want to sample when there definitely is an overflow, which we should not all want to happen, but we have the kits ready, so we can send those in. We don't tell them what we think is in there when we send it in, which has been very telling from the results that they've sent us. But yes, we are all interested. We just have not really been able to make great headway with that. Okay, so year 10. So when we look at things that we're thinking about for this year, and sorry, I'm trying to move so I can see my own writing, and I just moved it forward again. As mentioned, long-term analysis for each site. I really want to get into each one of the parameters and see what we can parse out from each site and what it tells us about areas that are challenged and areas that are improving. I already talked about the chlorophyll, that we're excited about being able to get that data more quickly, more cheaply, with less environmental impact. More data at Truxton for that before and after analysis. And things that we don't talk about as much that I want to make sure I call out that as Bob Creek Conservancy has done this wonderful job with educating kids in the area, communities, individuals, over the 9 to 10 years that we're now doing the sampling, there have been several dozen students at ACC that have participated in one way or another and get a huge appreciation for understanding the microcosm of a creek and how that's related to what's going on in the river and how that's related to what's going on in the bay. In addition, as I mentioned, with the Chesapeake Monitoring Cooperative for our water sampling techniques for the nutrient analysis that's done at CBL, that really fits their tier 3 level of certification. So those data can be used in official reporting. Right now, over the last 2 years, worked out parameters to be able to have that type of tier 3 designation for the bacterial testing also. And so I thank CMC for helping to get us all in a consistent place for some of this information. In addition, the in vivo chlorophyll, there are already initial steps for having CMC looking at that procedure as tier 2 or tier 3 to replace the extracted chemical method for that. With that, I just want to wrap up with one last thought. Another project that we do at ACC is horseshoe crab spawning surveys, and we've been doing that for 20-some years. We're trying to find out more about the horseshoe crab population in the Chesapeake Bay. And we're always looking for people that want to go out, new moon, full moon, high tide, very early in the morning. So if you're interested, you can always email me. The QR code may or may not work, I'm not sure, but you can always reach out to me. We're especially interested in if you know people that are we have gaps, especially on the eastern side of the Chesapeake Bay, where we'd like to get more people out and about looking for these horseshoe crabs. We also are doing DNA work with that to try to understand more about where they migrate between spawnings. The picture in the corner was just out Monday morning very early in Flag Ponds, and that was the first time we're starting to participate in that tagging project. So adding tags to the horseshoe crabs to see if we can catch them returning to the same beach or going to other beaches for spawning. With that, the many thank yous. Donna, Amy, and Dan and Jim, they've done so much to help us out for the funding and the freedom to have this great project, going out and doing the sampling. Patrick Denker, who has been our very long-term volunteer that goes out every week, spawn Back Creek, almost any weather, with Jason to do this sampling. Yay! That is an amazing help that allows us to get these midstream sites that are so important to the project. With that, the Denker Foundation, who also provides funding for this work, and is going to help with funding for underwater grass work that we're going to be doing. The Eastport Yacht Club Environmental Committee, who's been very invested in the water monitoring, also has provided the opportunity. We go out sometimes and do education for their summer sailing students. As mentioned, the CERC Chesapeake Water Watch program, which got us on board to do that project and has provided the aquaflora potential, specifically Tara Sill with that program, who's been a key networking point for that project. East Porter Rocking, who's provided funding for the sampling at the Annapolis Maritime Museum. Again, I just had a couple dozen ACC techs that have worked and helped out with this over the years. Jason Burkholder, full-time at ACC, he and Patrick. I think they make it much more fun than work going out on the Back Creek and Spot Creek, getting those samples. Live Water and Capital Sept, that's provided funding for sites on Back Creek. for a number of years, Kevin and Brian there. Annapolis Public Works for the funding to do the molecular source tracking, even though it did not give us any really clear answers. At least we know that we did not miss something, that we didn't have to go back and be like, geez, why didn't we test that? We tested it and now we're like, geez, why did we test that? With that, I'm happy to take any questions, and thank you for, oh, that was longer than I wanted. Thank you for your patience with this process. Okay.
That was great, Tammy. Thank you so much. And I love your new graphs. The little with the pretty ones with the little, because I have a hard time reading those graphs.
Just dots and lines. That's, just
Right, that's perfect.
Yeah. Jesse.
Hey, Tammy, thanks. Great presentation. Sorry my camera's not working. I'm not sure what the deal is there. I wanted to ask you a question about the nitrogen levels being higher in spring, which is sort of counterintuitive. I wondered whether it seems plausible to you that that might come from the accumulation of organic matter like leaves. In the fall, they're nice and crisp and whole, but over the winter they break down and get more and more particulate like. Might they become more soluble during that process, and then spring rains flushing that into the system help at least help account for that nitrogen spike? Or what do you think about that?
Yes, maybe. The one thing that, yes, but the one thing that like kind of argues a little bit against that is the pattern, or that, right? If we think about all that matter that's built up, then even we might expect that it would still be higher in the headwaters area, where you have more of that area for that material to be running in.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
But again, right, we're not sure. And, I can't, there's no perfect data that says that it's coming from Susquehanna. But Sally Horner had called, she had to call. I had looked online to try to find, I was always thinking about when the dam actually has releases, right, when they actually open the gates. But there's always there's flow quite a bit of the time. And she found one place where they actually had numbers for how much flow when. And so I need to call the same person that she called to figure that out, because it could be, right, if the same thing's going on up there, and then you have this huge flow of material that's coming down from up from the dam from Susquehanna, where all that material is built up behind it, that could be the source for, even if we think about the sources coming from the Susquehanna, the source in the Susquehanna could be because of that. So yeah, that is a good point. It could just, that could be a big part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. And I mean, thinking of the fact that Spa Creek is so close to the mouth of the Severn, it might be more susceptible to that Susquehanna Conowingo flow. And then, you've undoubtedly talked with Ellie Bassett, your South River keeper, about this, but she's been noticing nitrogen levels on the south that are stronger at the mouth than the headwaters, which is the same counterintuitive pattern. And that's her hypothesis there, is that it's coming from the bay as well.
Yeah. We've had talks. I've talked to Sally some about it. And yeah, it's really, when I go look at those sites, they call them like the BT sites that are, it's at the Eyes on the Bay, site. And when you really dig into those data, that was what was really enlightening. You can kind of watch the size of the peak, the concentration, that it actually is higher as you go north and kind of goes down. And then you see it higher at the mouth and then toward the headwaters. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you very much. Very interesting talk.
Thanks.
Somebody had a comment for you in the chat, so I don't know if you can open the chat.
Okay, yeah, now I can. Let's see. You have to think about. You say animal children just pay the DNA says can get yes, Jesse's comment, the DNA can get expensive. Yes, it was very expensive and not conclusive. Just comment, the seasonal variation spring to autumn in the data seems to totally overwhelm trends over the 10 years. Yes. So yes, that is a good comment. I'm trying to think there when you look at, so I don't know if you're referring specifically to the crazy dot, the many dot graphs. When you look at the trends, you see that when you're following the colors for each parameter, we do see these like, peaks and values, peaks and values, peaks and values. So those seasonal trends really are very significant in that real time over one season. And can be affected by, there's so many things that can affect those, right? Rainfall is, such a biggie. But, temperature shifts, rainfall, a single sewage overflow, that really contribute to those, small time factors. That it's because we have so much data now, we are able to like step back and take a look at the big picture. And this is what makes it, I guess, I don't want to say satisfying, because sometimes it's not always good news, but makes it, worthwhile, that when we get caught, when we're looking at just what's happening today, we forget that on the scale of all of the things that are affecting water quality, that you really want to have to think about long-term moving it in one direction or another, because on any given day, there's so many things that are affecting it, especially like rain is such a biggie, but we don't want to just think about rain, because it can be very easy to say, forget it, it's all impervious surface, it's going to rain, and after rain we just can't do anything, it's not worth it. But in long term, right, these restoration projects, then we see these, in some cases, gains, but sometimes it's just being able to hold steady, right? They're building more, there's more impervious surface. So even holding steady in some ways would be a win. So to see these improvements is encouraging. Anything else? Anybody else have any questions? Thank you again for your attention. That was geared to be 30 minutes and turned out to be, I like data too much, so.
Thank you very much, Tammy. It was always very interesting. We always wish we were going to get higher than a C- someday. In something we are.
We have C sometimes. So that's good.
True. That's true. That's all right. We'll take average.
Okay.
Thank you to everyone who was on the call. Anybody who has any questions, please reach out to us, or Tammy gave her information on the slide too. So we thank you all for your time, and especially thank you, Tammy. And good luck this year. It's going to be a good year.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night. Have a good season.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Donna. Are you Donna? Oh, I think Donna left. I was going to say, Donna, thank you for setting this up, but I think she's gone. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.